They thought 68 meant helpless. They were about to learn what a lifetime of building bridges and surviving wars actually teaches a man. I stood in my own kitchen, watching my son David rifle through my personal documents like he owned them. His wife Rebecca sat at my dining table, tapping her manicured nails against the mahogany surface my Martha had lovingly polished for 30 years. "Dad, we need to talk about your living situation," David said, without looking up from the stack of medical bills he'd somehow gotten his hands on. "These doctor visits are adding up, and honestly, this house is too much for you to handle alone." Rebecca nodded sympathetically, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Harold, we're worried about your safety. Yesterday you left the stove on for 3 hours. What if there had been a fire?" I hadn't left any stove on. I'd been in my workshop all afternoon, but arguing would only feed their narrative. At 68, I'd learned to pick my battles carefully. But what they didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything for weeks. You see, when you've spent 40 years as a structural engineer and 10 years in the Army Corps of Engineers before that, you develop certain skills. You learn to observe, you learn to plan, and most importantly, you learn that the strongest foundations are built in silence. David finally looked up from my papers he had no legal right to touch. "The bottom line is, Dad, you need professional care. Rebecca found this amazing assisted living facility just 20 minutes away. Golden years. Manor has everything, nurses, activities, even a small workshop where you can tinker around. 20 minutes away from my home. 20 minutes away from the life Martha and I built together." "And what happens to this house?" I asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Rebecca's eyes gleamed. "Well, obviously someone needs to maintain it. David and I could move in temporarily, you know, to keep an eye on things. The mortgage is almost paid off anyway, right?" There it was. The real plan. They wanted my house, the 3-bedroom colonial on Maple Street that Martha and I had bought in 1982. The house where we'd raised David, where we'd hosted every Christmas dinner, every birthday party, every celebration for 39 years. The house that was now worth $450,000, according to the property assessment they thought I hadn't seen. But here's what David and Rebecca didn't know about their confused old father. First, I'd never actually left that stove on. I'd been tracking their lies in a detailed journal for 6 weeks now, ever since I'd overheard Rebecca on the phone with someone saying, "The old man's losing it faster than we expected. We'll have him in a home by Christmas." Second, I wasn't alone in this fight. My neighbor Tommy Rodriguez, Detective Tommy Rodriguez of the Virginia State Police, had been keeping an eye on things after I'd casually mentioned some concerns about people going through my mail. Third, and most importantly, I'd already moved $80,000 of my retirement savings to a new account at a different bank, an account that David knew nothing about. You see, when Martha died 2 years ago, I'd grieved hard, really hard. For months, I'd barely eaten, barely slept, barely functioned. David and Rebecca had swooped in to help, gradually taking over more and more responsibilities. They'd started small, picking up groceries, handling some bills, organizing my medications, but slowly, systematically, they'd been building a case for my incompetence. The forgotten stove incidents that never actually happened. The missed doctor appointments that they'd cancelled without telling me. The confusion about bills that they'd been intercepting before I could see them. And I'd let them think it was working. "Dad?" David's voice snapped me back to the present. "Did you hear what Rebecca said about the facility?" I nodded slowly, playing the part they expected. "It sounds nice," Rebecca beamed. "Oh, it really is, and the best part is, they have an opening next week. We could have you moved in before Thanksgiving next week." They were moving fast now. "There's just one small issue," David continued, his voice taking on that patronizing tone that made my blood pressure spike. "We'll need to get power of attorney transferred to me, you know, to handle the financial side of things. Make sure all your bills get paid, the house gets maintained, that sort of thing. Power of attorney, the final piece of their puzzle." That's when I decided it was time to stop playing confused. I walked to my kitchen counter and picked up the cordless phone. You know what, you're right, I should call someone about this living situation. David smiled, probably thinking I was about to call Golden Years Manor. Instead, I dialed a number I'd memorized weeks ago. Margaret Chen Law Office. This is Margaret. Margaret, it's Hank Morrison. I think it's time we had that conversation we discussed. The silence at my kitchen table was deafening. David's face went white. Dad, who are you calling? I kept my eyes on him as I spoke into the phone. Yes, Margaret, they're here now asking for power of attorney. I think we should move forward with the documentation we prepared. Rebecca stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Harold, you can't just make legal decisions without discussing them with family. I covered the phone with my hand and looked at her directly for the first time in months. Rebecca, I've been making legal decisions since before you were born. The only thing I can't do is understand why my own son thinks I'm too stupid to notice when someone's trying to steal my life. The war had just begun, and they had no idea what they'd awakened. Margaret's voice came through the phone, clear and professional. Hank, I'll be there in 20 minutes with the documents, and I'm bringing Tommy Rodriguez as a witness. I hung up the phone and turned to face my son and his wife. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't the grieving widower who needed their help. I wasn't the confused old man who left stoves on and forgot appointments. I was Harold Morrison, retired structural engineer, army veteran, and a man who'd just declared war on the people trying to steal his legacy. David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Dad, what documents is she talking about? I poured myself a cup of coffee with steady hands. The kind of documents a man prepares when he realizes his own family is treating him like an ATM machine with a pulse. Rebecca's mask finally slipped. You ungrateful old bastard. We've been taking care of you. No, I said quietly. You've been taking care of yourselves. With my money, in my house, using my grief as your opportunity. And that was just the beginning of what they were about to learn about underestimating a man who'd survived everything life could throw at him. The doorbell rang exactly 20 minutes later. Through the window, I could see Margaret's silver, Honda and Tommy's police cruiser in my driveway. David was pacing now, his real estate salesman confidence completely shattered. Dad, I don't know what lies this lawyer has been feeding you, but the only lies in this house, I interrupted, are the ones you and Rebecca have been telling about my mental state to anyone who'll listen. I opened the front door to let Margaret and Tommy inside. Margaret Chen was 62, sharp as a tack, and had been the legal counsel for Morrison Engineering back when I was still working. Tommy Rodriguez was 35, built like the high school football star he'd once been, and lived 3 houses down with his wife and twin daughters. Both of them had known me for years. Both of them knew exactly how sharp my mind really was. Good afternoon, Mr. Morrison, Margaret said formally, carrying a thick briefcase. Are you ready to proceed with the legal protections we discussed? Tommy nodded at David and Rebecca politely. Folks, I'm here as an official witness to some document signings. Hope that's all right. David tried to recover his composure. Officer Rodriguez, I think there might be some confusion here. My father hasn't been thinking clearly lately, and Tommy held up a hand. Mr. Morrison, I've been chatting with your dad pretty regularly for the past few months. He seems pretty sharp. To me. Helped my daughters with their math homework just last week, as a matter of fact. The look of panic that crossed Rebecca's face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. Margaret opened her briefcase on my dining table, spreading out papers with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Harold, these documents establish several important legal protections. First, a revocable living trust that places all your assets under your sole control, with specific instructions about who can and cannot make decisions on your behalf. David stepped forward. Now wait just a minute. Second, Margaret continued, ignoring him, a comprehensive power of attorney document that specifically excludes David Morrison and Rebecca Morrison from any legal authority over your finances, medical decisions, or property. Rebecca's voice went shrill. This is insane. We're his family. Tommy pulled out a small notebook. Ma'am, maybe I should mention that I've been documenting some interesting activity around Mr. Morrison's property. Mail being intercepted, unauthorized, Persons going through his personal papers, that sort of thing. I watched my son's face crumble as he realized how completely they'd been outmaneuvered. Margaret handed me a pen. "Harold, are you making these decisions of your own free will, without any coercion or undue influence?" "I am," I said clearly, loud enough for Tommy's notebook. "And do you understand that these documents will prevent anyone from making financial or medical decisions on your behalf without your explicit written consent?" "I understand completely." As I signed each document, I could feel the power dynamics. In my own home shifting back to where they belonged, David made one last desperate attempt. "Dad, you're making a huge mistake. We're just trying to help you." I set down the pen and looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in months. "David, if you'd wanted to help me, you would have asked what I needed instead of deciding what was best for me. You would have included me in conversations about my own life instead of planning my future behind my back." But the real surprise was still coming. Margaret pulled out one final document. "Harold, do you want to proceed with the other matter we discussed?" I nodded. This was the part I'd been looking forward to most. "What other matter?" Rebecca demanded. Tommy flipped to a fresh page in his notebook. "As of today," I announced, "David and Rebecca Morrison are formally trespassed from this property. Any attempt to enter without my explicit permission will result in criminal charges." The silence was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You can't do that." "Actually," Tommy said mildly, "he can. It's his house." Rebecca exploded. "This is ridiculous. Harold, you need us. Who's going to take care of you? Who's going to make sure you don't burn the house down or forget to take your medications?" I smiled for the first time in months. "Rebecca, I've been taking care of myself just fine. The only thing I forgot was how good it feels to make my own decisions in my own home." Margaret packed up her briefcase with satisfied efficiency. "The documents are filed with the county clerk. Copies are being sent to your bank, your doctor's office, and Golden Years Manor, just in case anyone tries to make unauthorized arrangements." As they prepared to leave, Tommy handed David a business card. "Mr. Morrison, if you have any questions about the trespassing order, give me a call. And folks, Mr. Morrison here has my direct number if anyone gives him any trouble." After they left, I stood in my quiet kitchen, surrounded by the life Martha and I had built together. For the first time in 2 years, it felt like my home again. But I knew this was just round one. David and Rebecca would be back. They'd be angry, desperate, and probably willing to try things that would make their previous scheming look like child's play. Good thing I'd spent 40 years learning how to build things that could withstand any storm, and this old man wasn't done fighting yet. They thought kicking them out was my nuclear option. They had no idea I was just getting warmed up. 3 days after the trespassing order, I was in my workshop sharpening my wood chisels when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the window, I saw a white van with Elder Care Solutions painted on the side, followed by David's BMW. My son climbed out with a grim expression and a clipboard. Behind him came a woman in scrubs who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, and Rebecca, who had clearly been crying but was trying to look official. They were making their counter move. I set down my chisel and walked to the front door, arriving just as David raised his fist to knock. "We need to talk, Dad," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Actually, you need to leave," I replied evenly. "You're trespassing." The woman in scrubs stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Linda Hayes from Elder Care Solutions. Your son has expressed serious concerns about your mental health and living situation. I'm here to conduct a wellness assessment." This was exactly what I'd been expecting. You see, when you've been married to a nurse for 37 years, you learn a few things about the healthcare system. You learn about involuntary psychiatric holds. You learn about emergency guardianship proceedings. And you learn that adult children can sometimes manipulate the system to get what they want. But you also learn how to protect yourself. "Ms. Hayes," I said politely, "do you have a court order for this assessment?" She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Well, no, but then you're trespassing too, Officer Rodriguez," I called toward the street where Tommy's patrol car was conveniently parked. He'd been making extra passes by my house since Tuesday, just like we'd arranged. Tommy strolled up my driveway with the casual confidence of a man who'd played this scene before. "Problem here, Mr. Morrison?" David tried to take control. "Officer, my father is having a mental health crisis. We're trying to get him help." Tommy pulled out his notebook. "That's so. He seemed pretty lucid when he helped my daughters with their geometry homework yesterday evening." The woman in scrubs looked confused. "Sir, I was told Mr. Morrison was showing signs of dementia, confusion, inability to care for himself." "Ma'am," Tommy interrupted, "are you a licensed physician?" "No, I'm a social worker, but—" "Then you're not qualified to diagnose dementia, are you?" Rebecca finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. Harold left the stove on. He's been forgetting to take his medications. He almost burned the house down." That's when I played my first real card. I pulled out my smartphone, the one David always claimed I was too confused to use properly, and opened the video app. "Rebecca, I'm curious about this stove incident. Could you tell me exactly when it happened?" She glanced at David nervously. "It was last Tuesday, around noon." I tapped the screen. "That's interesting, because this is security footage from my kitchen camera, Tuesday at noon." I turned the phone toward Linda Hayes and Tommy, showing crystal clear video of me making a sandwich, turning off the stove after heating soup, and leaving the kitchen with everything properly shut off. "The timestamp shows I was only in the kitchen for 12 minutes, I continued. "And, as you can, say I turned off the stove, checked it twice, and even wiped down the counter before leaving." Linda Hayes was staring at the phone screen. "Mr. Morrison, you have security cameras in your home. Installed them 3 months ago. Amazing what you can learn when you suspect someone might be lying about your mental state." David's face had gone pale. "Dad, when did I what, son? When did I become smart enough to protect myself from people trying to have me declared incompetent?" Tommy was writing in his notebook again. "Ms. Hayes, seems like maybe you got some inaccurate information about Mr. Morrison's condition." The social worker looked deeply uncomfortable. "Mr. Morrison, I apologize for the confusion. Based on what I've seen today, you appear to be fully competent and capable of making your own decisions." She turned to David. "Sir, filing false reports about someone's mental health is a serious matter. I'll need to document this visit accurately." But I wasn't done yet. "Ms. Hayes, before you go, I'd like to show you something else." I led the group to my dining room, where I'd laid out a detailed timeline on the table. It looked like something from a police investigation, which, in a way, it was. "This documents every claim David and Rebecca have made about my incompetence over the past 2 months," I explained. "Here's the day Rebecca told my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, that I'd been wandering the neighborhood confused. Here's the security footage, showing me taking my usual evening walk to the mailbox and back." I moved to the next column. Here's David telling my doctor's office that I'd been missing appointments. Here are the appointment confirmation calls on my answering machine, calls that someone mysteriously deleted before I could hear them. Tommy was photographing the timeline with his phone. "Mr. Morrison, this is pretty detailed documentation. 40 years as an engineer teaches you to keep good records," I replied. "Linda, here's my favorite one. Last month, Rebecca called my bank claiming I'd been confused about my account balance and asking them to send statements to David's address instead of mine." Linda Hayes was taking notes furiously. "They did what?" I handed her a printed email. "Here's the bank's response, confirming they'd received the request but needed my written authorization before making any changes. An authorization I never provided." David was backing toward the door. "Dad, look, maybe we made some mistakes, but..." "Mistakes?" I stepped closer to my son, and for the first time in 2 years, he actually stepped back from me. "David, you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my house. That's not a mistake, that's a felony." The room went dead silent. Tommy closed his notebook. "Mr. Morrison, would you like to file a formal complaint?" Before I could answer, my granddaughter Sarah's voice came from the front door. "Grandpa, what's going on?" 16-year-old Sarah Morrison walked into my dining room like a ray of sunshine cutting through a storm. She was tall like her father, but had her late grandmother's sharp intelligence in her eyes. "Hi, Dad," she said coolly to David. "Mom." She nodded at Rebecca without warmth. I came over after school to help Grandpa with his computer like I always do on Fridays. David tried to recover his parental authority. Sarah, you shouldn't be here right now. We're handling some adult business. Sarah looked at the timeline spread across my dining table, then at Linda Hayes with her official clipboard, then at Tommy with his police notebook. Are you trying to put Grandpa in a nursing home again? She asked bluntly. Again, Tommy echoed. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Sarah had been my secret weapon all along. While David and Rebecca were plotting my downfall, my granddaughter had been documenting their real behavior from the inside of their household. Sarah, I said gently, remember what you told me about the conversation you overheard last month? She nodded, suddenly looking older than her 16 years. Mom and Dad were on the phone with someone about getting power of attorney. Mom said, she glanced at Rebecca, Mom said they needed to move fast before Grandpa got suspicious and lawyered up. Linda Hayes stopped writing. Excuse me? Sarah pulled out her own phone. I recorded it. I was worried about Grandpa, so I started keeping track of things they said when they thought I wasn't listening. She played a 30-second audio clip that made David sink into one of my dining room chairs. Rebecca's voice came through clearly. The old man has way more money than he lets on. David found bank statements showing over $200,000 in retirement accounts we didn't know about. If we can get him declared incompetent, we can control everything. David's voice responded, the house alone is worth almost $500,000. We just need to be patient and build the case that he can't take care of himself. The silence that followed was deafening. Tommy was already reaching for his radio. Linda, I think we need to make some official reports here. Linda Hayes had gone pale. Mr. Morrison, I am so sorry. This is attempted elder abuse on multiple levels. But Sarah wasn't finished. There's more, Grandpa. Remember when they said you'd been forgetting to take your medications? I nodded. Mom's been taking some of your pills, the blood pressure ones. I saw her putting them in her purse. Rebecca exploded. That's not true, Sarah, you're lying. Mom, I watched you do it. You said Dad's insurance wouldn't cover your prescription, so you were borrowing from Grandpa's. Tommy keyed his radio. Dispatch, I need a supervisor and Detective Martinez at 847 Maple Street for a possible elder abuse investigation. David made one last desperate play. Dad, please, we can work this out as a family. You don't want to see your own son arrested, do you? I looked at David, really looked at him, and for a moment I saw the boy who used to help me in this. Same workshop, learning to use tools, learning to build things that would last. But that boy was gone. Son, I said quietly, when you decided to steal from me, you stopped being my family. You became something else. Sarah walked over and hugged my arm. I'll always be your family, Grandpa. I know, sweetheart. And that's why I'm fighting so hard to make sure you inherit something worth having instead of watching it get stolen. Within 20 minutes, my dining room had filled with official personnel. Detective Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, was photographing my timeline and Sarah's phone recordings. A supervisor from Elder Care Solutions had arrived to investigate Linda Hayes' initial report. Tommy was taking formal statements. David and Rebecca were sitting on my couch like defendants at their own trial. Detective Martinez finished reviewing my documentation and walked over to where I was standing with Sarah. Mr. Morrison, this is one of the most thorough cases of evidence gathering I've seen from a civilian. Did you have law enforcement experience? Army Corps of Engineers for 10 years, then civilian engineering for 40. You learned to document everything. She smiled grimly. Well, you've documented a clear case of attempted financial elder abuse, attempted fraud, and conspiracy. We'll need formal statements from you and your granddaughter. But the biggest surprise was still coming. Margaret Chen arrived just as Detective Martinez was explaining the charges. My lawyer friend walked into my house carrying a thick folder and wearing the satisfied expression of someone about to deliver very good news. Harold, she announced to the room, I have the results of the private investigation we discussed. David's head snapped up. What private investigation? Margaret opened her folder with theatrical precision. The investigation into David and Rebecca Morrison's financial activities over the past 6 months. She handed Detective Martinez a bound report. It seems Mr. Morrison's concerns were well-founded. We discovered that his son had been using Harold's personal information to apply for credit cards, had attempted to change the beneficiaries on Harold's life insurance policies, and had been systematically intercepting his mail to prevent him from receiving bank statements and other financial documents. Rebecca was crying now, real tears of panic, not the fake ones she'd been using to manipulate me. "How did you—" David started. "How did I hire a private investigator?" I interrupted. "The same way I hired Margaret, the same way I installed security cameras, the same way I moved $80,000 to a new bank account you don't know about." I walked to my front window and looked out at the neighborhood where Martha and I had lived for 39 years. "David, you made one fundamental mistake in all of this. You assumed that because I'm 68 years old, I must be helpless. You assumed that because I grieved for your mother, I must be weak." I turned back to face him. "But what you forgot is that I didn't get to 68 by being stupid. I survived Korea, built a successful engineering firm, raised a family, and buried the love of my life. You think a couple of spoiled adults trying to steal my house is the worst thing I've ever faced?" Detective Martinez was handcuffing Rebecca, who had apparently tried to leave while I was talking. "David Morrison," she announced, "you're under arrest for attempted elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft." As Tommy read David his rights, my son looked at me with something that might have been regret. "Dad, I'm sorry, I never meant for it to go this far." "Yes, you did," I replied simply. "You meant for it to go exactly this far. You just never meant to get caught." After they took David and Rebecca away, Sarah and I sat in my quiet kitchen, sharing a pot of coffee and watching the sun set through the window. "Grandpa," she said finally, "are you sad? About Dad and Mom getting arrested?" I thought about the question for a long time. I'm sad about who they chose to become, but I'm not sad about stopping them. What happens now? I smiled at my granddaughter, the one member of my family who had chosen to stand with me instead of against me. Now we figure out how to rebuild what they tried to tear down, and you help me make sure this house stays in the family for someone who actually deserves it. Sarah grinned. "You mean me?" "I mean you, but first you've got to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll never let anyone, not even family, treat you like you're too old, too young, or too anything to stand up for yourself." She squeezed my hand. "I promise, Grandpa, I learned from the best." As night fell over Maple Street, I realized this wasn't the end of my fight. David and Rebecca would lawyer up. There would be court dates, testimony, probably a trial. They'd try to paint me as a vindictive old man who'd turned on his own family, but let them try. I had truth on my side. I had evidence. I had allies who respected me instead of trying to control me. And most importantly, I had learned something David and Rebecca never understood. Real strength isn't about dominating other people. It's about refusing to be dominated by anyone, even your own children. 6 months later, David thought a tearful phone call from county lockup would make me forget what he'd tried to steal. He was about to learn that forgiveness and stupidity aren't the same thing. I was in my workshop, building a jewelry box for Sarah's 17th birthday when the collect call came through. The automated voice announced, "You have a collect call from David Morrison at the Virginia Regional Jail. Will you accept the charges?" I almost hung up. Almost. Instead, I set down my sandpaper and accepted the call. "Dad?" David's voice was different, smaller. The cocky real estate salesman was gone, replaced by someone who'd spent 6 months learning what consequences actually felt like. "I'm here. Dad, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said months ago. I waited. I'm sorry, not sorry I got caught, but sorry for what I did. What we did to you, to our family. For 6 months, I'd been waiting to hear if my son would figure out the difference between those two kinds of sorry. You see, the court proceedings had been everything Margaret warned me they'd be. David and Rebecca's lawyer tried every trick in the book. They claimed I was a vindictive old man who'd misunderstood their innocent attempts to help. They suggested I was suffering from paranoid delusions brought on by grief and isolation. But the evidence was overwhelming. The security camera footage, Sarah's recordings, the private investigator's financial records. the testimony from my neighbors who'd witnessed Rebecca going through my mail. The jury took less than 3 hours to convict them both. David got 18 months for elder abuse and attempted fraud. Rebecca got 2 years because the judge found her to be the primary architect of the scheme. But what hurt most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was discovering how long they'd been planning it. The private investigator, a sharp woman named Carol Martinez, Detective Martinez's sister, as it turned out, had uncovered the full scope of their plot. They'd been researching nursing homes and guardianship laws for over a year, building their case for my incompetence while I was still deep in grief over Martha's death. They'd seen my vulnerability as an opportunity. "Dad?" David's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you still there?" "I'm here, son. The thing is, I had a lot of time to think in here about Mom, about what she would say if she could see what I did. Martha." My chest tightened at the mention of her name. What do you think she would say? David was quiet for a long moment. "She'd be ashamed of me. She'd be proud of you for fighting back." That admission hit harder than any apology. Martha had loved David fiercely, but she'd never tolerated selfishness or cruelty. She'd been a pediatric nurse for 30 years, and she'd seen enough families destroyed by greed to recognize it when it was growing in her own home. "Dad, I know I have no right to ask, but when I get out, could we maybe try to rebuild something? Not the old relationship, I know that's gone, but maybe something new." I watched sawdust motes dance in the afternoon light, streaming through my workshop window. This was the conversation I'd been preparing for, but it was harder than I'd expected. "David, rebuilding requires a foundation of trust. How do I know you won't try this again in 5 years when I'm 73 instead of 68? "Because I lost everything, Dad. Rebecca divorced me 2 months ago. She blamed me for everything, said I should have been smarter about not getting caught. The house we were renting got foreclosed on because we couldn't make payments without your money. I lost my real estate license because of the felony conviction." He was listing consequences, not making promises. "David, losing things isn't the same as learning from mistakes. What would you do differently if you could go back?" Another long pause. "I would have asked you what you needed instead of assuming I knew what was best for you. I would have respected that you're still capable of making your own decisions. I would have talked to you about money instead of trying to steal it. That was better, but I needed to hear something else. And what about Sarah?" "Sarah?" His voice brightened for the first time. "Dad, she's amazing. She's been writing to me. You know, not to be nice, but to tell me exactly how disappointed she is in my choices." I smiled despite myself. That sounded like my granddaughter. She told me about her college plans. Georgetown pre-law, said she wants to become an elder rights attorney because of what you went through. That news made my chest swell with pride. Sarah had indeed decided to focus her academic career on protecting seniors from financial abuse. She'd spent the past 6 months volunteering with the county's Elder Services Department, helping other families navigate situations similar to ours. But more importantly, she'd been learning to manage real responsibility. After David and Rebecca's arrest, I'd established a small trust fund for her college expenses, one that required her to maintain certain grades and complete community service hours to access. She was thriving under expectations instead of wilting under them. "David, here's what I need you to understand. When you get out of jail, you'll need to prove you've changed, not just say it. And that proof needs to last years, not months." "I understand." "Do you? Because the easy thing would be for me to welcome you back and pretend this never happened. The hard thing is maintaining boundaries even with family members who've hurt me. Dad, I don't expect you to trust me right away. I expect to earn it back if that's even possible." That was the first thing he'd said that sounded like actual wisdom instead of just regret. "When you get out, you'll need a place to live and a way to make money with a felony record. I'm willing to help with both, but there will be conditions." What kind of conditions? I'd been thinking about this conversation for months, planning it the same way I'd planned his legal downfall. "First, you'll live in the basement apartment I'm having built, not in my main house. You'll pay rent below market rate, but you'll pay it. You'll handle your own utilities, groceries, transportation. Okay. Second, you'll attend counseling. Not court-mandated anger management, but real therapy to figure out how you became someone who would steal from his own father. Yes, that makes sense. Third, you'll work for me. I'm starting a handyman business for seniors who need help with home maintenance. You'll be my employee, not my partner. You'll earn your wages and prove you can hold a job and treat people with respect. David was quiet for almost a minute. Dad, why would you do that for me after everything? Because despite everything, I still remembered the boy who used to help me build birdhouses in this same workshop. Because you're still my son. But you're not my responsibility anymore. If you want to be part of this family again, you'll earn it. And if you ever try to manipulate or steal from me again, you'll discover that these 6 months in county lockup were nothing compared to what I'll do to protect myself. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not the same man I was 6 months ago. David, I'm not the grieving widower you thought you could take advantage of. I'm not the confused old man you tried to paint me as in court. Who are you now? I looked around my workshop at the tools I'd been using for 40 years, at the projects that gave my retirement meaning and purpose. I'm Harold Morrison. I'm 68 years old, I own my own home, I make my own decisions, and I don't take shit from anyone, including family members who think they can play games with my life. David actually laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from him in years. Mom always said you were tougher than people realized. Your mother was a smart woman. She also would have kicked your ass for what you tried to do to me. Yeah, she would have. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my workshop for a long time, thinking about second chances and family loyalty. The truth was I missed my son. Not the manipulative schemer who'd tried to steal my house, but the man I'd hoped he would become. The man Martha and I had tried to raise, but missing someone and trusting them are different things. A knock on my front door interrupted my thoughts. Through the window, I saw a young woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase. Mr. Morrison, I'm Jessica Chen, Margaret's daughter. I'm here about the case we discussed. Jessica Chen was 28, fresh out of law school, and working for a firm that specialized in elder rights cases. More importantly, she was helping me with a project that would ensure no other family went through what I'd experienced. I led her to my dining room, where we spread out documents that represented 6 months of careful planning. Mr. Morrison, the foundation paperwork is complete. The Harold and Martha Morrison Foundation for Elder Protection is officially incorporated and ready to begin operations. This was the part David didn't know about yet. While he'd been sitting in jail, I'd been working with Margaret and Jessica to establish a non-profit foundation that would provide legal and financial assistance to seniors facing family-based financial abuse. The foundation was funded with $150,000 from my retirement accounts, money David had been counting on inheriting. We've identified 12 cases in the county that match the pattern of what you experienced, Jessica continued. Families using emotional manipulation to gain control of elderly relatives' assets. And the legal clinic? Opening next month. We'll provide free legal representation for seniors who can't afford attorneys. Margaret will supervise and we'll have 2 junior lawyers handling cases full-time. I smiled, thinking about Martha. She would have loved this project. There's one more thing, Jessica said. We've been contacted by the State Attorney General's office. They want to feature your case in a public awareness campaign about elder abuse prevention. The idea of going public with my story had both excited and terrified me. On one hand, I wanted other families to learn from what I'd experienced. On the other hand, I valued my privacy. What would that involve? Television interviews, probably. A documentary, maybe speaking engagements at senior centers and legal conferences. I thought about all the seniors who might be sitting in their own homes right now, watching their children make helpful decisions about their lives, not realizing they were being systematically robbed of their autonomy and assets. Let's do it. That evening, Sarah came over for our weekly dinner together. At 17, she was already showing the kind of character I'd hoped to instill in her father. Grandpa, I got my acceptance letter from Georgetown today. I looked up from the pasta I was serving. And, she grinned, full academic scholarship. 4 years, everything covered. I set down the serving spoon and hugged my granddaughter, feeling pride swell in my chest. "Your parents would be proud," I said, then caught myself. "Your grandmother would be proud. Your father, well, he'll have to earn the right to be proud." Speaking of Dad, he called me yesterday. "How did that go?" Sarah's expression grew serious. "He sounds different, more real, I guess, like he's actually thinking about what he did instead of just feeling sorry for himself. And how do you feel about that?" This was the conversation I'd been hoping for. Honestly, I'm glad he's in jail. Not because I hate him, but because maybe he needed to lose everything to figure out who he really wants to be. The wisdom in her words reminded me so much of Martha, it took my breath away. "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" "Always." "When Dad gets out, are you really going to let him live here and work for you?" I'd been wondering if she'd have concerns. "About that, what do you think I should do?" She considered the question carefully. "I think you should give him a chance to prove he's changed. But I also think you should make it really, really hard for him to prove it." "Why?" "Because if it's easy, he won't value it. If it's hard, he'll either rise to the challenge or reveal that he hasn't really changed." This 17-year-old girl understood consequences better than most adults I knew. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you about your future." I handed her a folder I'd prepared for this conversation. "Your college fund is fully funded. Your graduate school fund is established. And when you turn 25, you'll inherit this house and a significant portion of my assets." Her eyes widened. "Grandpa, I can't—" "Yes, you can, but there are conditions." She opened the folder and read the terms I'd established with Margaret's help. "You have to maintain a 3.5 GPA through college and law school. You have to complete 100 hours of community service each year. You have to spend at least one summer working with the foundation we're establishing. And if I don't meet the conditions, then the money goes entirely to the foundation, and you'll make your own way in the world like most people do." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "You're teaching me to earn what I inherit. I'm teaching you that everything worth having requires effort and character. Your father forgot that lesson. I won't let you make the same mistake." That night, after Sarah left, I sat on my front porch watching the sunset over Maple Street. For the first time in over a year, I felt something that might have been peace. David was in jail, learning consequences. Rebecca was out of our lives, permanently. Sarah was thriving under real expectations and responsibilities. My house was mine again. My money was mine again. My decisions were mine again. But more than that, I'd discovered something I hadn't expected. Revenge didn't have to be about destruction. Sometimes the best revenge is building something better from the wreckage other people leave behind. The foundation would help other families avoid what we'd gone through. Sarah would become the kind of lawyer who protects people instead of exploiting them. And maybe, just maybe, David would emerge from jail as the man I'd once hoped he could be. Or maybe he wouldn't. But either way, I'd be ready. Because at 68, I'd finally learned the difference between loving someone and letting them destroy you. And that was a lesson I planned to keep teaching for as long as I had breath in my body. 18 months later, David walked out of Virginia Regional Jail carrying everything he owned in a paper bag. He thought his punishment was over. He was about to learn that earning forgiveness is harder than serving time. I was waiting in my truck outside the jail gates at 7 a.m. sharp, just like I'd promised during our last phone call. David emerged looking thinner, older, and carrying himself differently. The swagger was gone, replaced by something that might have been humility. He climbed into the passenger seat without saying a word at first, just stared through the windshield at the road ahead. "Thank you for coming," he said finally. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me in a year if you're still earning the chance I'm giving you." The basement apartment I'd had built was Spartan but comfortable. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a living area with a work desk. Everything he needed, nothing he didn't earn. "Dad, this is more than I deserve." I handed him a folder thick with documents. "Here's your lease agreement. $800 a month rent, due on the 1st. Your job description for Morrison Home Services, your therapy appointment schedule, Dr. Sarah Williams, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and a list of rules that aren't negotiable." David sat on his new couch and read through everything carefully. The rules were simple but comprehensive. No access to my main house without permission. No contact with elderly clients outside of supervised work. Weekly drug and alcohol testing. Complete financial transparency. I would review all his bank statements, spending and earnings. Most importantly, any violation of trust, any attempt to manipulate or deceive me or our clients, and he'd be evicted immediately with no second chance. This is like being on parole. It's exactly like being on parole. The difference is, your parole officer wants to see you succeed. That first month was harder than either of us expected. David struggled with basic life skills he'd forgotten during his marriage to Rebecca. How to budget on a limited income, how to cook simple meals, how to do laundry without someone else handling it, but he stuck with it. Morrison Home Services started small. Basic handyman work for seniors who needed help with household repairs, but couldn't afford commercial rates. I provided the truck, tools and initial client base from my network of neighbors and church acquaintances. David provided the labor and slowly, very slowly, began rebuilding his reputation. The first real test came 3 months after his release. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an 82-year-old widow on Elm Street, called in a panic. Her basement had flooded during a heavy rainstorm, and she needed immediate help moving furniture and cleaning up water damage. David arrived at her house before I did and found Mrs. Patterson in tears, standing in 2 inches of muddy water surrounded by floating photo albums and ruined furniture. When I got there 20 minutes later, I found David had already moved her to the dry living room, made her a cup of tea, and was carefully separating salvageable photos from the damaged albums. Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Patterson told me, your son is an angel. He's been so gentle with my late husband's things. I watched David work for the next 4 hours. He was patient with Mrs. Patterson's anxiety, careful with her belongings, and thorough in his cleanup. Most importantly, when she offered to pay him extra because it was such a big job, he politely declined and stuck to our agreed-upon rate. That night, David knocked on my kitchen door for the first time since his release. "Dad, can we talk?" I invited him in, made coffee, and waited. Today, with Mrs. Patterson, I remembered something Mom used to say. I felt my chest tighten at the mention of Martha. She used to tell me that how you treat people when they're vulnerable tells you everything about who you really are. Your mother was a wise woman. I spent so many years treating vulnerable people, especially you, like opportunities instead of human beings. Today I remembered what it felt like to actually help someone. This was the conversation I'd been hoping for since his release. "David, what changed?" He stared into his coffee cup for a long moment. "In jail, I met this old man named Frank. He was in for writing bad checks to pay for his wife's cancer treatments. Every night he'd cry himself to sleep because he couldn't be there to take care of her. I waited. Frank died of a heart attack 3 months before his release. His wife died 2 weeks later, alone. And all I could think about was, what if that had been you? What if you died while I was in jail and the last thing I'd ever said to you was a lie about trying to help you?" David's voice broke on the last words. "That's when I realized I hadn't just tried to steal your money. I'd tried to steal your dignity, your autonomy, your right to make decisions about your own life. For the first time since his arrest, I saw my son instead of the stranger who'd tried to manipulate me. So what are you going to do with that realization?" "I want to spend whatever time you have left proving that I can be the son you and Mom deserved, not because I want your inheritance, but because I want to earn your respect." It was the right answer, but I needed to see if he meant it. 6 months later, Morrison Home Services had grown from a 2-person operation to a small business with 4 employees and a waiting list of clients. More importantly, we'd prevented 3 cases of elder financial abuse by family members, situations where David's experience with manipulation helped him recognize warning signs. But the real test came when Sarah graduated from Georgetown. She'd earned her bachelor's degree in 3.5 years, maintained a 3.8 GPA, and been accepted to Georgetown Law with a full scholarship. The graduation ceremony was everything Martha would have wanted to see. David sat beside me in the auditorium, wearing a suit I'd helped him buy with money he'd earned himself. When Sarah's name was called, he applauded so hard I thought he might break his hands. Afterward, at the small celebration dinner I'd arranged, Sarah stood up to make a toast. 2 years ago, I watched my grandfather fight for his dignity and his independence. I watched him refuse to let anyone, even family, treat him as less than capable. That fight inspired me to become a lawyer. She looked directly at David. I also watched my father lose everything, because he forgot that love means building people up, not tearing them down for your own benefit. David's face was serious, but he didn't look away. But over the past year, I've watched him rebuild himself. Not just financially, but morally. He's become someone who helps people instead of exploiting them. Sarah raised her glass. To Grandpa for teaching me that strength means standing up for yourself, and to Dad for proving that it's never too late to become who you should have been all along. As we clinked glasses, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pride in my entire family. The Harold and Martha Morrison Foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations. In its first year, we'd provided legal assistance to 47 seniors facing family-based financial abuse. The success rate was remarkable. 39 families were able to resolve their situations without going to court, and the remaining 8 won significant settlements. More importantly, Jessica Chen had been promoted to director, and the foundation was being replicated in 3 other states. But my proudest achievement was sitting across from me at that dinner table. Sarah was heading to law school with a clear purpose and the character to achieve it. David was building a legitimate business and helping people instead of exploiting them. And I was 70 years old in good health, living independently and making my own decisions. 3 months after Sarah's graduation, I received a phone call that brought everything full circle. "Mr. Morrison, this is Linda Hayes from Elder Care Solutions. I hope you remember me." I remembered. She was the social worker David and Rebecca had manipulated into trying to declare me incompetent. "I remember you, Linda. What can I do for you?" "I'm calling because I have a situation that's very similar to what you went through. An elderly gentleman whose family is trying to have him declared incompetent so they can control his assets. He specifically asked for you." "What do you mean?" "He saw the documentary about your case. He said if Harold Morrison could fight back and win, maybe he could too." The documentary had aired on PBS 3 months earlier. Fighting back one man's battle against elder abuse had generated more response than the network expected. My phone had been ringing for weeks with people asking for advice, sharing their own stories or requesting help. "What's the gentleman's name?" "Robert Chen. He's Margaret's father." I smiled. Margaret's father was 85, sharp as a tack, and being pressured by his other children to sign over power of attorney to someone who wasn't Margaret. "Tell Mr. Chen I'll be happy to talk with him. And Linda, thank you for calling me instead of assuming he's incompetent. Mr. Morrison, what you went through changed how I do my job. I'll never again accept family reports about someone's mental state without independently verifying them." That evening, I called a family meeting in my living room. David, Sarah, and I sat around the coffee table where Martha had served tea to visitors for 30 years. "I want to tell you both something important about the future and about what happens to all this when I'm gone." Sarah leaned forward. "Grandpa, you're only 70. You could live another 20 years. Maybe, but I want you both to know what my plans are and why." I handed them each a copy of my updated will. "Sarah, you'll inherit the house and the foundation assets when you finish law school. But there are conditions about maintaining the foundation's mission and continuing to help families like ours." She nodded, reading carefully. "David, you'll inherit Morrison Home Services and the business assets. There are conditions about maintaining her client service standards and continuing to employ people who need second chances." David looked up from the document with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I don't deserve this." "You're right, you don't deserve it. You'll have to earn it every day for the rest of your life. But here's what I want you both to understand." I stood up and walked to the mantel, where Martha's picture sat beside photos of our family in happier times. "This isn't just about money or property, it's about continuing something your grandmother and I started, a belief that families should Build each other up, not tear each other down. I turned back to face them. David, your mother would be proud of who you've become over the past year, not because you avoided going back to jail, but because you remembered how to help people instead of using them. Sarah, she would be amazed by your strength and your sense of justice. You took the worst thing that happened to our family and turned it into a way to help other families. Both of them were crying now. And me. I learned that love doesn't mean accepting abuse even from family. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries and enforce consequences. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, I was in my workshop building a cabinet for Sarah's new apartment near law school when David knocked on the door. "Dad, there's someone here to see you." I followed him to the front door, where a young man in his 30s was standing with a teenage girl who looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Morrison? I'm Jake Chen, Margaret's nephew. This is my daughter Emma. We heard about what you did for families like ours and, well, we think we need help." I invited them into my living room and listened to a story that was becoming all too familiar. Emma's grandfather, Jake's father, was being pressured by other family members to move to a nursing home so they could sell his house and divide the proceeds. "The thing is," Emma said, "Grandpa is fine. He drives, he cooks, he takes care of his yard. But my uncles keep saying he's too old to live alone." "And they've been talking about getting guardianship," Jake added. I smiled, thinking about how many times I'd heard this exact story over the past 2 years. "Emma, how old are you?" 16. Same age Sarah was when she helped me fight for my independence. "Are you willing to help your grandfather fight for his?" Her eyes lit up. "Yes, sir. Absolutely." As I reached for my phone to call Margaret, I realized something profound had happened. 2 years ago, I'd been an isolated, grieving widower whose own family was trying to steal his independence. Today, I was the center of a network of people committed to protecting elderly dignity and family integrity. The boy who'd once helped me build birdhouses had become a man who helped other people rebuild their lives. The granddaughter who'd been brave, enough to record her parents plotting, had become a young woman dedicating her career to protecting people like me. And the foundation Martha and I had dreamed about during our late-night conversations had become a reality that was changing lives across multiple states. That evening, I sat on my front porch watching the sunset over Maple Street, holding a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from Frank Patterson's widow, the woman David had helped during the basement flood. She'd written to tell me that David had checked on her every week since that day, helping with small repairs and simply providing companionship. "Your son has been an angel to me," she'd written. "He reminds me that there are still good people in the world who help others without expecting anything in return." I folded the letter and slipped it into my shirt pocket next to my heart. Martha would have loved knowing that our family had found its way back to kindness. As the streetlights came on along Maple Street, I whispered a promise to the evening air. "I'm still here, love. Still fighting, still building something that will last." And somewhere in the distance I could almost hear her whisper back, "I know, Harold, I'm proud of you, I'm proud of all of you." At 70 years old, I'd learned the most important lesson of my life. Real victory isn't about defeating your enemies. It's about transforming them into better people. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those better people turn out to be your own family.